takuyepi, iushkiama chiankapi katonte washte nape chiozapie, Jessica Fremland and makiapie. Hi everybody, my name is Jessica Fremland. I'm Sisseton Wapton, Dakota. I'm so happy that you're all here today to be a part of this really fantastic panel that we have with a performance as well. So, and the panel today is called Mapping with Words, Performance, and Poetics of Place. So this panel also includes two performances. The first will be with Raquel Gutíerrez, and the second with Joshua Rios and Anthony Romero. So I'm going to start with a couple of their bios, and then we'll move into the performance as well as space for some questions from me and then some from the audience. So first we have Raquel Gutíerrez, who is a critic, essayist, poet, performer, and educator. Gutíerrez's first book, Brown Neon, was named as one of the best books of 2022 by The New Yorker and listed in the best art books of 2022 by Hyperallergic. I can speak. Those are words. Okay. They are a 2025 recipient of the United States Artist Fellowship and the Foundation for Contemporary Arts Fellowship in Poetry. Their first poetry collection, Southwest Reconstruction, is out late fall 2025 on Noemi Press. They are faculty in the Creative Writing MFA program at the Institute for American Indian Arts. Gutíerrez has lived on the unceded lands of the Tohono O'odham and Pascua Yaqui people since 2016. Joshua Rios is an educator, media artist, and writer whose projects deal with the histories, archives, and futurities of Latinx subjectivity and U.S.-Mexico relations as understood through the intersections of modernity, post-modernity, and neocoloniality. Josh's projects highlight moments of intercultural contact and co-belonging. Recent performances and projects have been featured at the Art Institute of Chicago, Andrea Meislin Gallery in New York City, and the Stony Island Arts Bank in Chicago. Recent writing includes the essay, A Possible Future Return to the Past, published in Soma Technics through Edinburgh University Press. Upcoming projects include an exhibition at the Autonomous University of Mexico State featuring the archive of science fiction and cyberpunk writer Ernest Hogan and the group exhibition Monarchs, Brown, and Native Contemporary Artists in the Path of the Butterfly at the Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts. And also a performance for the exhibition, A Decolonial Atlas, Strategies in Contemporary Art of the Americas at Tufts. And finally is Anthony Romero, an artist, writer, and organizer committed to documenting and supporting artists and communities of color. His collaborative practices engage intercultural exchange and historical narratives in order to generate reparative counter-images and social transformation. Recent projects and performances have been featured in the Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts, the Blue Star Contemporary, the Institute of Contemporary Art, and the Mountain Standard Time Performative Art Biennial. Publications include The Social Practice, that is Race, co-authored with Dan S. Wang, and the exhibition catalog, Organize Your Own, The Politics and Poetics of Self-Determination Movements, of which he was the editor. He is a co-founder of the Latinx Artist Visibility Award, a national scholarship for Latinx artists produced in collaboration with artist Jay Soto and Oxbow School of Art. Romero was also a professor of the practice at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts at Tufts University, a fellow of Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University, and is currently an assistant professor of visual arts at Dartmouth. Thank you all, and I'll give way to Raquel.
I'll be reading an excerpt of an essay, work in progress, and it's currently untitled, but it's an essay for an exhibition happening next summer at the Harwood Museum of Art in Taos, New Mexico. It's called Unearthing Futures, and it is a range of Latinx mestizo artists indigenous artists working in different earth and architecture, Adobe registers, projects, and so this is a portrait of place, a research trip traveling from northern New Mexico through southern Colorado and back again. Special thanks to Joshua Rios and Anthony Romero for this beautiful collaboration. Driving north on State Highway 84 through the routes that follow the Rio Grande's elusive curve northward, waving at the Saints and Sinners neon sign in Española, stopping at El Parasol for deshebrada and pop bottles of Piñon Cola, seeing signs for the homelands of Okiawinge, all indicators that our eyes swept the surrounding hills, and through them I saw for the first time the wild beauty of our hills and the magic of the Green River. After a day and a half of convivial deep hanging over tacos from La Cueva, brick-making shop talk, an intel gathering walkthrough of the entire grounds of the Harwood Museum, and a last day tour of the mind-blowing Nicolas Herrera El Rito Santero first solo museum exhibition, we had found a fast intimacy, and like a mestizo artist Voltron, clicked in place. We were a group of 5, Ronald Rael from Conejos, Colorado, Rafa Esparza from Pasadena, California, Joanna Keene Lopez from Albuquerque, New Mexico, Tina Gonzalez, Los Lunas, New Mexico, and me, Huntington Park, California. It was decided we would leave Taos and ride to and through the San Luis Valley together. We would see the land from a series of moving vantage points, to zigzag through the crosshatch of time and space through a chain of perspectives connecting specific settler histories of southwestern expansion across one border, 2 states, and several nations within. Riding together on this excursion offered a similarly transportative quality I gleaned in each other and their visual artistic philosophies, their media and collaborative processes of creation, and their respective bodies of work. Each of these artists forge pathways grounded in tense binaries that converge in the adobe brick. Inside, outside, insider, outsider, settler, native, citizen, immigrant, maker, consumer, creator, destroyer. A full day of road tripping through the contextual terrains gave us a precious opportunity to gently break open personal adobe histories and partake in the anecdotal registers that situate the innovations of adobe form and function. We spoke of the range of earthen material. The red dirt of Chimayo came up a few times, and their immersive capacities despite the limits placed on these artistic productions by both gallery and museum. We took turns narrating our familial histories, the storied details of the New Mexican artists being able to go back to 14 generations, while the Southern Californians among us could project as far back as 4 across the U.S.-Mexico border, with a cameo appearance by my matrilineal El Salvador side. Borders that weren't borders too long ago, but reinforced in such a way to remind a lot of us in that truck that we were still foreigners in our own contested lands. Together, we would bear witness to the complexities of each other's upbringings as they feed into the critical confluence of regional historical labor practices and the unsettling of narratives that hinge on these future museum objects. We loaded up on breakfast provisions, jumped into Ron's muted red GMC Sierra and headed down Highway 522, then to Colorado State Road 159 to that day's first destination. We arrived at Fort Garland, a military installation resembling a small plaza built in the mid-19th century and established to protect against the Confederacy from encroachment on Western lands. It was where Christopher Kit Carson held command and led expeditions to defeat Diné resistors and dispossess them of their land and resources. The place itself reminded me of reruns of F Troop. I used to watch them as a kid and had a striking thought about the implications of Saturday afternoon settler colonialist propaganda wrapped up in dawn of television comedy misfits dressed in cringeworthy red-face and ne'er-do-wells in Union Navy uniforms. The bit of late May sunlight on an otherwise cloudy day landed on several facades of the installation, catching the tinsel-like straw baked in each adobe brick. The Vigas' tales were architecturally curious, a vision jogging yet another childhood memory of playing with Lincoln logs. Tony, the facilities director, caught me staring closely at one of the threshold walls, and he was nodding pridefully while signaling that I was losing my pacing with the rest of the group, moving in unison to the rhythm of executive director Eric Carpio's historical narration for our exclusive tour of the place. The fort was a series of converted soldiers' quarters and common spaces, though some have retained the historical quality of their era. most notably the old jail with its jarring black painted windowless walls that held a mind-numbing cell and its haunted latrine buckets. However, the galleries of Fort Garland are hued in sandstone and beige that stage a range of artworks in ways that call in the local region, an alternative to the antiseptic white cube aesthetic that prevails in contemporary art galleries and museums. It is an aesthetic that this group of artists push against, overtly or not, as if the white wall or the pedestal is an ideological itself. This is the first time some of us encounter artist Chip Taylor's work. Taylor was the lead artist for Fort Garland's impressive Buffalo Soldiers exhibition, a multi-year, deeply researched undertaking that tracks the history of the all-Black Army units who were, quote, stationed at Fort Garland from 1875 to 1879, and played an important role in American westward expansion and the displacement of indigenous populations, end quote. A medical doctor by training, Taylor's place-based unsilenced work had included this installation, the stunning Lafayette Heads List in Conejos, an official document made by the then Lieutenant Governor Lafayette Head tracking the first name, typically of a child, woman, or man stolen from the Navajo Nation, a devastating history existing as separate lines on a ledger, and assigned to the purchasing family in nearby Conejos County in southern Colorado. The work is printed on off-white translucent cloth and hung in the middle of the first gallery we stepped in. An arresting work that stirred a troubling history, the lot of us meeting each other's eyes in unnerving recognition of the bureaucracy invented to justify kidnapping and enslavement. This is how the figure of the Genízaro emerges in our conversations, the detribalized native. It is hard not to imagine the image of the lone ancestor who was often a child or a woman offered as gifts in times of Spanish families coming together through matrimony, forced off their land and to work as slaves or indentured servants, or soldiers, as the translation suggests, forced into new labor and family structure as well as assimilating into Spanish culture, adopting new surnames, and compelled into Catholicism. It is a story of new identity formations, a conflicted mixture that our group of contemporary mestizos was intimately familiar with. As brown, Latinx, Chicano artists, we are always already the products of old meets new world ancestral violent communion. The day before our trip to the valley, we had all snapped photos or had commented on the pile of broken wooden crucifixes at the base of the crumbling San Geronimo adobe chapel, remnants of the graveyard peppered with crosses that lies at the entrance of Taos Pueblo, a material sign of the historical violence that seems to wave and flap in the ethers of the valley. Violence that makes for a mundanity awkwardly narrated in other tours throughout the region. On this visit, we learned that the chapel was destroyed and desecrated when in 1846, American troops fired cannons into the chapel, retaliating against Pueblo and Mestizo rebels who had resisted American control by killing the newly elected American governor, Charles Bent. Almost 2 centuries before, there was a Spanish revolt of 1680, where hundreds of Spanish settlers were killed during the attack carried out by the Puebloans, desperate to return to what Southwest historian Ramon Gutíerrez called the state of their antiquity. The lore we learned that day: each cross that falls organically from its function as grave marker gets tossed into the pile too. This, along with Tiwa Pueblo adobe homes having ladders and hatch-like entrances from the ceiling above, eschewing the doors and thresholds introduced by the Spanish. Our young tour guide holds a beat for our collective surprise as she shares this architectural footnote. My mind, as a way to cope with the unbearable truths of dispossession, turns to a type of speculative wonder whenever inundated with unsettling facts about colonial encounters embedded in the Southwest past. What if we all still use a ceiling hatch to come into our domiciles? What if doors were never introduced? What if history's cultural collisions happened with more harmonious ease, a common ground built on enthusiastic mutual respect and not the constant cycle of subjugation? A moratorium on the rehearsal of bloody and ruthless conquest that remains unchangeable on the page of every history book. These are usually the questions that follow up to, what if all of our homes were made from adobe? A speculative optimism that has no space in the mission of capitalist expansion. And this is why we are here, to compare a myriad of ways to travel top-down into one rabbit hole of this specific vernacular architecture and together find ways to imagine its futures while reckoning with its past. Adobe has never been a building material free of its own historical violence. It has often been the object in which its handling has created unfathomably exploitable conditions. This is how the Catholicism of Taos Pueblo strikes a familiar note in me. As a child of Mexican and Salvadoran immigrants growing up in California, I was part of a generation of students whose fourth grade curriculum included a historical study of the mission system. This lesson culminated with a traditional model building experience where my peers and I tried to represent the haciendas of 18th century California, located along a key trade route that became known as El Camino Real. I was excited to build something out of popsicle sticks and upcycled cardboard with my mom. I remember she cut a piece of the hot pink bougainvillea that grew over the wall of the alley behind our house and stuck it in a window in the mission's gatehouse. It was the closest thing I got to making a 3D model of something. It wasn't a four-door orange Ford Corvette, but San Juan Capistrano seemed a decent consolation prize. A toxic nostalgia whose work is to obscure the cruel reality of its existence. The mission system was built on forced labor and indoctrination, a means to colonize and control Tiwa-speaking Pueblo people and create economic gains for the Spanish crown. It was an enterprising endeavor for the Franciscan Order of Priests. It has been a cultural defining system whose history is recited daily, an exercise that can't be good for a nervous system and definitely not for business. So these facts are often softened into elision. But it's a history one has to go to a lot of trouble to find, learn, and sit in as if it were one of the many hot springs hiding in plain sight in Ojo Caliente, Jemez, or Las Vegas. History is considered here in a year that has seen unfathomable terror unleashed in Latino immigrant and first-generation communities are repeating or being whitewashed and erased altogether. The alarming arc of authoritarianism has bent upward, informing national headlines. It is also a narrative called upon to maintain the othering effect, a powerful tension, Mexicanos, Latinos, who have been here for one generation, and Latinos who can go as far back as 14 generations on a single tract of land. The time loop narrative that paints Latinos as perpetual, newly arrived immigrants ignores their deep indigenous and colonial roots in the Americas, which long predate the current borders. Thank you.
holy water, interrupted by my finger, the cold of a small stone church, the static of the vacuum on early Sunday mornings, trumpets, an accordion, a healing whisper, the brush of rosemary, the hiss of fire, the pop of the stove, the click of keys locking doors, bells ringing in the distance, hunted by trains, wild dogs chatter.
Returning to noisy Texas. An echo leaves, but it also returns. Bitter tannin of pecan shell. A silent egg on a bedside table. The imperial ear hears the colonial territory as hostile. Citation of the everyday, the unverifiable, and knowledge excluded from the written record. Returning to noisy Texas. A cud of sour dock chewed. Settler ancestors, non-settler ancestors, unsettled ancestors, movement ancestors. The sweetness of a mesquite pod. A cud of sour dock chewed. Knowledge encoded and transmitted through the body. The smell of toasting white rice. Bonfires, trash fires, winding trails to a creek.
sound like running water, flintstone and dry creek beds, bleached bones, sagebrush and cedar fence posts, septic tanks, tires muffled with cement, air conditioners humming, and voices huddled together in a cackling house. My mother's voice from the other side of a closet door, a police officer yelling, I hear, I hear, I hear. I hear, have heard, am listening still, even despite a deafening desire to stop. Birds scratching at my window screen, screaming from their trees as heat settles heavy on my shoulders. Against this noise, looting, plundering, a ship sets foot on the shore, its sails still dirty from the voyage, its hold hungry. A siren calls. Waves rush from the horizon with warnings drowned by their hurried frenzy. I can hear myself say, 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 I can hear myself say.
Summer hot Manguera water, rolled bobbed wires stacked on the tree stump your grandfather cut down, bitter tannin of pecan shells, deer hoof, antler running through a field of stickers, worn out shoelaces and clinging burrs, bonfires, trash fires, and winding trails to the creek. Oil refineries lit up at night like roadside constellations, an egg silent on a bedside table. The senses are what we make of them. Can the subaltern speak? Which is another way of asking about the possibility of being heard, about the relation between the center, the periphery, and their sonic legibilities. A better question is not whether the subaltern can speak, but to whom they might speak, and to whom they refuse to speak. Gravel pit, limestone quarry, alfalfa, and cow campsite. Tins of my grandmother's sewing supplies, gifted cowboy hats, too nice to be worn, my grandmother's wedding dress wrapped in plastic, a rusted rifle, my late grandfather's suit. belonging and estrangement, cool to the touch, hoop earrings for the ofrenda, curandera, the photographed, the unphotographed, the unphotographable, returning to noisy Texas, well-seasoned Comau, glaring plastic of the archive, settler ancestor, a cassette tape, testimonial warbles. Meanwhile, cicadas exude their cosmic buzzing, the sweetness of mesquite pods, a cud of sour dock chewed, burned barrel, trash fire, crackling, cackling, every morning, early morning frost, like lace, like breath, prickly pear, the earthy aroma of hay bales stored in the abandoned house, unclaimed kin, reclaimed kin. Thank you.
Thank you all for that incredible set of performances. I really appreciated the ways that all of you were thinking through sound, and I do have a question about that as well, but I think I'd like to start with just giving you all an opportunity to discuss how you came to your mode of activation and engagement as it pertains to poetics, right? So, and I think that you're all engaging with poetics in a number of different ways that have to do with these various aesthetics, right? There's visual aesthetics as well as the sounding ones. So if you would all like to start with that opening about how you came to poetics and how it found you.
Let's see, to poetics, so, I mean, I think when I hear that question, I can't help but sort of feel that or situate that as some sort of like origin story, an origin narrative in the sense, or the poetic in the sense of like my awareness of my poetry making. Mm-hmm. But for this particular project, and also just in the frame of the context of our gathering, you know, I live in Tucson. I'm originally from Southern California, from Los Angeles. I've lived in Southern Arizona, unceded Tohono O'odham, Paspayaki lands since 2016, and for myself, in terms of just poetry making, it was through revolutionary poetry of the Solidarity movement, of U.S. out of Central America era, and so finding poetry through Margaret Randall and Roque Dalton, and as a way to sort of express unease with the authoritarian regime, and a way to sort of connect with other sort of los de abajo, underdog, populations and language. But for our project here, you know, I shared a piece that for me is very lyrical, and it's also a way of offering a portrait of a place, and a portrait of moving through a place, and sort of thinking through travel, migration, mobility, and the transportational as a way to sort of read histories of dispossession, histories of settler colonialism, and histories of thriving and of remaking in the landscape, of moving through the landscape. And so feeling I'm going to use one of your terms, Jessica, the transtemporality of the landscape, and through language, and so, but also poetry. It's a series of associative leaps and images, and finding ways to tether them, and feeling very connected to Anthony and Josh's work here through sound and the all-encompassing, in the sense that I feel like when I hear their work, it's like being out in the field. It's a field it's an experience of the field of an outdoor.
I like that. You want me to go?
Sure.
I like that. I'm just like in the field. I'm also transitioning, so this is like, I'll come to life in a minute. I grew up in a rural environment. I grew up in the Texas Hill Country. And so, like, art, I think, was like whatever kind of found me. And I would go to the video store, and we would drive into town on the weekends. And my parents would do groceries, and they would like leave me at the video store or bookstore or something, and I would just dig through books. And I happened across this VHS tape, and so now you know what time period it was. And
you were at Blockbuster.
Very close. And it was this movie called Slam that had Saul Williams in it.
Oh.
Yeah, okay.
Classic.
And so it was like I was like, oh my gosh, words could do this thing. And it really blew a lot of things open to me. I also was a very like emotional, dramatic child.
And adult.
Heavy goth tendencies. I know, I was feeling like that last one, that last bit of text there. Anyway, so for me it was spoken word. It was like both the kind of performance of it, and also the freedom of it. It didn't like, it's all kind of later on you learn things get structured, and structures can look like different things, and process is something that adjoins structure. But at the moment, it just looks like, oh, you can just say things. And that felt really freeing. And we could psychoanalyze that later, but like the ability to just be able to say what I wanted to say felt really important and remains really important.
You asked that earlier, and I thought maybe you might think about poetics as a kind of maybe a little bit like of a more encompassing term, maybe less precise in some ways and more abstract, but also just kind of maybe more applicable to something that has multiple kind of media sensibilities, including like action. So what does like a poetic action look like, or a kind of spoken word where language is put together, or this other poetics of like ambiance and just like vibe, like how to create a sort of feeling. So like how do you like archive feeling, or how do you sort of write, how do you like enunciate a kind of feeling, maybe not just through words but other kinds of ways of sort of moving through the world. But if it's origin story time, I went to like a regular high school in a sort of settler environment, and our poetry classes read things like The Imagist, William Carlos Williams and people like that. And there was already poetry, of course, in the world, like in my everyday environment growing up around my family, but that was my first exposure to like poetry with like a capital, I don't know what, capital Y at the end. Somehow, I'm going to just flip it around. But the idea of the image, I think that was really important. Like the sort of, I don't want to really talk about like William Carlos Williams too much at all, actually. But that kind of way of sort of isolating an image and maybe not necessarily, and leaving a lot of things out. So you have to kind of put yourself in there and fill in a lot of details. And then I went to art school. But I did not like it. And that's partially on the school I went to and their sort of way they thought about art making. But after maybe a semester or two of that, I was like pretty displeased, so I thought maybe I'll go to a more sort of another environment and see how that felt. And that was in English department, and I ended up sort of finishing school with an English degree and with an emphasis in poetry. And then, but there's always the poetry of like home to deal with as well, which was kind of really exciting. Like somebody mentioned a kitchen table earlier, and that was definitely like a kind of scene where a lot of laughter was occurring, a lot of family members gathered around ribbing each other, and there's that kind of poetry of sort of being able to connect dots very quickly and know people deeply and know, I don't want to say how to press their buttons, but like the field of their buttons. And you don't want to press the ones that but you know which ones those are too, but sort of like seeing my family navigate each other that way through language and through gesture, like knowing each other and ribbing each other and like laughing so loudly at the kitchen table that all of the kids were like, can you please, us the kids are telling the adults, can you please keep it quiet, we're trying to watch cartoons or whatever we were doing.
I'm like, I think that's my regular laughter.
Yeah.
Which also, I feel like I think this also actually does bring me to wanting to talk specifically about the activations of sound in your work and the kinds of feelings that you are able to create through that sound. And I'm thinking specifically about the ways that desire and temporality interact in your work through sound. And I think, Raquel, you referred to this as both speculative optimism and speculative wonder, which I think has also showed up a lot throughout this entire day and in multiple different types of activations. But with that, I'm also thinking about the temporality that's curated in beat making and the cadences of your voices and the movement between pregnant pause, lyrical punctuation, and all against that kind of durational vibrato or field that you're creating. And I'm thinking about, I'm also a spoken word poet, and I know for me anyway, there's so many elements of rehearsal that go into prepping, but there's also so many elements of improvisation that come up. So I'm thinking about if you could comment a little bit about the intersection of improvisation, rehearsal, desire, and temporality within your sonic practice, and what does that offer for you and for a decolonial politics? I came up with that.
Right at the end there.
Y'all didn't know.
You were like, what this? Yeah, I appreciate that.
Every once in a while I get a gem,
Well, I thought you were going, and then you went. Okay. Yeah.
Please,
Someone want to start?
I invite you.
See, now I'm not going to remember all the parts. So I got hooked on decolonial. Okay, sound. Let's start with sound. Okay, and this is probably like a bigger conversation, but I'll plant the seed, and then we can like tend to it over the rest of the day and the evening and maybe into the night. So the seed is the problem of representation. And I feel like this has come up across the panels today. And maybe we'll get into our own individual questions of representation and what that means. But one thing I love about sound is that it's anti-representational. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So a sound like running water could be gravel, could be a rattle, could be seeds in a jar. Could be a seed pod drying on a plant. Like I love that, And I love that sound does that. And it can make you think one thing, and the material that's producing it can be something else entirely. And I love that portal that opens up in how we walk through it. So that's one part. Then the other part is something that Josh and I think a lot about is like, or we have a lot of conversations about, is creating a kind of portrait of a place through its sounds. Because I think especially for myself, coming from a rural environment, like, and some of it is in the text, we could talk about like sagebrush and cedar, and we could talk about those things too, but those things are one aspect of it, and then the other aspect of it is like that sound of the train that would come through, or, Josh is talking about the refineries, the cement factories, all this kind of stuff, like the sound of the creek, the sound of the stove working, or, I grew up in a very small house, and my parents grew up in a one-room house with like 7 siblings, or they grew up on farms and stuff. So there's all this kind of cacophony that feels like as much a part of the place as anything else. So that's, I think I'm trying to get to both for myself in our practice is like, I'm interested in both playing with that sonically, and then I'm interested in what happens when I say a sound like running water, and then you produce a sound in your head that is like running water. Like I'm interested in that place too, where that can send audiences. And the last thing around improvisation is like, that's just how we survive the world, you know what I mean? Like, you interact with structures all the time that you're not supposed to be inside of, and or you don't understand quite how to navigate, and so you try some things out, and you listen, and you respond, and you move, and so it feels yeah, it feels crucial, but yeah, maybe I'll leave it to you, Rios, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I think sometimes when I'm just trying to figure out the thing I'm putting together, I revert back to just binaries. So I think about, okay, so if we have a composition, what's on the opposite side, on the other side of composition, or if we have improvisation, what would the what's on the pole there? What's the spectrum in the sense if we have improvisation on one pole, what resides on the other pole? As a way to sort of work my way back and forth to, in the sense, improv or I don't know. And I mean, then the word that comes to mind is virtuosity or virtuosic or rehearsed or planned. So I'm thinking about just, and I set up these binaries to kind of think through the power differentials, power dynamics in the way that a work is sort of set up or a work is received. I feel like sound for me is really truly a site of pleasure as a receiver of the work, as a participant in the soundscape, as a critical witness to sort of the range of ambient sonic output. And so for me, it feels very much, there is something pleasurable in the frequencies that are sort of emanating from the speakers and whatnot. So I get a lot of feeling of freedom and a lot of feeling of just like, it feels good, it feels pleasurable. And also there's something around the temporality of sound that for me, I always ask like artists, I'm like, or I always tell them like, those 35 minutes, those 40 minutes, they went by really quickly, and I feel like it should have gone longer because it just feels fucking good. So in the sense, in the way that we're sort of setting up kind of the points of legibility around sound and trying to create a common vocabulary and understanding for the ways that we're all sort of inhabiting the space of sound. It's all very cool and helpful. I think for me, the transportative feels like an interesting sort of means of inhabiting. So and also, I almost said occupying. So.
I also grew up kind of in a somewhat rural / sometimes urban environment, and although my mom did take me to a museum when I was relatively young, there was no museums in our area, so there was no access to that kind of like fine art culture that was it just wasn't around. But what was around was my grandfather and my mom. They all played music in a church setting. So that those things were always around, like different kinds of instruments, amplifiers. I think I saw my first stack of orange amps, which is notorious amp that like Black Sabbath played, like on a church stage, and so that memory is like very much ingrained. My grandfather played guitar, but he didn't really play guitar at the same time. Meaning he kind of figured out his own way how to play the guitar, and he would make up improvisational sort of songs, mostly kind of like testaments to his sort of religious beliefs and conversion to Christianity or whatever. And that's all fine, or that's all kind of like messed up. But I kind of put that aside just because it was just when we would go to visit him, and my grandparents, just everyone there, he would always like play these improvisational songs that felt very like haunting and beautiful, but also made up on the spot. And I think that was my introduction to like this sort of improvisation. It was at home first, and then it was like punk, and then it was jazz, and then it was this sort of larger world, the sort of maybe global world of like improvisational music. But first it was there. Yeah.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
And maybe, it opens something for y'all to respond to. Just to get to the decolonial part at the end. One thing I love about sound is that it's unruly, right? So it doesn't care if there's a wall or a fort or a border.
Right.
Like, it's just going to go. And one thing that Josh and I have written about is this idea of sonic territorialization. So an example of that would be that when the English came to settle here in New England, one of the things that they would do very quickly is erect a bell tower. And the ringing of the bell was meant to alert all who heard it that they were now under English rule. So in this way, the bell becomes the first wall, right? And then they fort everything around it. Now, that's kind of one formulation. Okay, here they come, here's the bell, you hear the ringing of the bell. But then the other thing that happens is a process of re-territorialization, right? So the drum, in the case of this settlement experience, but also like people with Bluetooth speakers on the train, or, people at the grocery store talking on the speakerphone, like you take up a lot of sonic space.
Right.
And that's also a way of making territory. That's also a way of like making room for oneself and one's community. And that's a beautiful thing. So it should come as no surprise that what the English also did was start to legislate and criminalize sonic practices, right? And they said, okay, well now you can't have this drum, right? You can have the bell, you can't have the drum. So I want to add that too, because I do think it's like an important thing to kind of think about, and it's certainly something we think a lot about, and feels maybe in some ways related to the sound, like the kind of pleasure of the sound. And there's 100 examples, right? We could talk about like, the invention of house music, or we could talk about sound systems, or we could talk, there's like many examples in many different communities for that way of like, we make a space for ourselves with sound.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think it is calling me towards another question that I had for y'all, but I won't ask it because I want to give opportunity for everybody to ask questions as well. But just thinking about sound as a method of placemaking, and I think one of the things I was thinking about earlier in a talk unrelated to this, but it was mentioned about Eve Tuck's work as, when we come to a place as visitors, and how do we become in purposeful relation with that place. And so I'm thinking about y'all's work as that kind of potentially decolonial practice. So thank you so much for sharing everything. And I do want to give the audience a chance to ask a couple questions. I think we have time for probably 2. So. Who's up? Just kidding.
Oh, yeah, please.
Oh, yes, this is great.
Please.
Yes, finally.
Usually before I take a photo, I look at what's going on. This was great because I got to listen. So I have generally thought about this, how one becomes an artist. And quick question to the room. How many folk here identify as an artist? As artists, okay. So, yeah, love that, right? A lot of people are into art for a long time and don't call themselves artists, and I was that until I picked up a camera and was shooting events for my family's business, and then I just said, this is a really cool and expensive thing. Maybe it does cool things like other artists do, and at a point I started to say the word artist and identify as such. What you all's performances, I think part in poetry, of course, is growing up listening to hip hop. You start spitting raps at the lunch table, but you're not an artist, but you can spit a couple bars, but until you put out an album, you're not an artist maybe. The sound making, okay, I've been doing that for a long time. I guess that's a piece of one thinking about how we create artists, how we raise artists. When your parents come in and say, stop making noise,
Right.
Someone could have overheard that and said, okay, what's the difference between noise and art?
Yes.
And then so in your journeys with your mediums, how did that line get crossed? How did you define that? When did you define yourself as that? And then what's maybe guidance you give to maybe some people in this room who are on that line? Should we identify? Should everyone? Do you want more people who don't call themselves artists to call themselves artists? Should it be protected and reserved for those who have a particular practice in a particular medium that produces sounds and looks a particular way? So what was your journey, and what's your perspective on the general kind of path to being one?
I mean, it could be like, maybe there's a other question too, like who here is involved in creativity? And that's like everyone. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
Even that has some hesitancy, by the way.
Huh?
Even that has some hesitancy, by the way.
Maybe a little bit, but I just think of that because I'm very tentative about inhabiting this identity of the artist for all the reasons that you might expect. One of them being like the rarefication of creativity or the sequestering of creativity to this sort of white cube institutional space. Like, I do think that that's a big mistake. And maybe, it's a kind of disaster. The other reasons have to do with like the social position of the contemporary artist and the sort of kinds of privileges that are required to even be able to arrive at a point where you can go to art school or something like that. What are the risks involved, and who can afford to take those risks? Surely, one of the things you might hear from your parents, if you're going to art school, is like, why would you do that? It's such an unstable and kind of precarious future, and some people can take that role of that risk because of generational access to resources, and other people can't. And then there's also things around like race and gender, like who could even make a painting of a historic scene, like I'm thinking historically speaking, like the history of painting, and how does that history exclude not only people along gender lines, but then kind of moving forward, how this identity of the artist also excludes people along racialized lines as well. So it's like a whole sort of social, economic, political, historical kind of intersection that kind of all comes together in this figure of the artist. And so whenever I think about, like, even say telling students something like, okay, yes, when I'm introducing myself, I'll say I'm a contemporary artist. Kind of, with reservations and hesitations, not because I just don't believe in the power of creativity, but for all these other reasons that I just sort of mentioned. I'll mention that to them as well. Yeah.
You were going to say something?
I think it's interesting in the sense that I'm just sort of letting the idea of this hesitation or reluctance to avow the artist's role. I think it's interesting. I think it's also just training in the sense that we're sort of, generally speaking, discouraged and inhibited from self-expression, whether it's, I feel like family, we all love our families, but for families that have discouraged people from pursuing artistic paths, I just feel like, oh man, okay, so your family was like the government, your first encounter with the government, and so, or your family is essentially like your first cops, and so like the family is essentially a way to sort of resist all that training, and then maybe make and find like an additional family or just like a separate family, an artistic family, creative family. I don't know. It's I feel like the creative ecosystem, like we're all part of one, but I think it's harder to come by just because of the way that our third spaces are sort of diminishing, and we're not really able to create Publix, on our own terms. And I feel like the way that art schools, institutions now are sort of geared into institutional pipeline from one to another, versus like, I tell folks like, you should really think about doing an artist-run project, an artist-run space, something where you're collaborating and sort of encouraging each other to avow an artistic identity. But yeah, there is, there's something to be said about the way that everyone is sort of shy about claiming being an artist because this culture doesn't value them. Whereas, a lot of places around the world, value their artists and have ways for artists to live and to do their artistic, have a livelihood because of their creative output. So there's a lot of upstream swimming, whatever, to do the thing, and but a lot of it is in our intimate sort of spaces, family spaces.
Yeah, the FBI, the Familial Bureau of Investigations, is like real.
Dream killers.
Maybe just briefly, I'll say, because I know we're running out of time, is I appreciate the invitation to come visit. Thank you. I'm looking at y'all. Thank you. And every time we visit like this in the art world, it's like we tell the story, and we tell different parts of the story. So in this context, I'll tell this part of my story in this way, which is that there are like two separate things, right? Like one is the practice of making a thing in the world and making a world, and the other is the identity. So I'll speak to the identity. And a life is long and complicated. And I grew up in a rural environment in an unstable household, and I wanted out. And I wanted to become a different kind of person than the things that I felt as a young person were my options. I'm the first one to go to college. I'm the first one to leave our small town, which my mother reminds me of every time we talk on the phone. And like, I had all these feelings, and I'm like, this kind of like very sensitive brown kid in this environment, and I was like, how am I I'm gonna be an artist. You know what I mean? Like, and like really in here, like I wanna be an artist. And that felt like the most transgressive thing of all time.
Yeah.
And then the confusing thing is, as the story goes on, ... to be continued at another visit, you get into the practice of being an artist, and you encounter these different art worlds where they don't know what to do with you because you're still the same emotional brown body, like moving through the world. Like you didn't change anything. You know what I mean? So that's the ... But in that story, it's like I was like, I'm out of here. I'm gonna write some poems.
I also think, too, just to kind of bring it back to the previous panel as well, I think each of the panelists in that portion were also talking about the ways that art shows up in their own communities. And, not to, create a blanket overgeneralization, but certainly in a number of our communities, art isn't a word in our indigenous languages. And the way that art has been, I think, subsumed under the carceral control of the settler state within institutions like museums and things like this, and like how Eric Paul was talking about these, items that certainly have energies about them, right? And spirits in them are being held behind glass cases to never be interacted with or touched or felt or communicated with. And so I feel like a lot of times maybe the hesitancy to refer to ourselves as artists is because of that layered history that marks art as something that is so precious it can't be touched, and that is like a part of, like, what I mean, a part like separate from ourselves in a way. So yeah, I'm thinking about that too. And then also, I think certainly like that when you asked about the difference between noise and sound, I think that's incredibly racialized, and so. But I think we might be at time. So, is there one more question? Okay.
Oh, here's the definition of noise. There's nothing more noisy than the party you were not invited to.
Ain't that the truth?
This is so quick.
It's a contextual thing, you know?
So if you had a pop song that summed up your practice.
Are you back on the karaoke?
Yes, but it's not karaoke. It's like quick, like you're just like, you didn't think about it. What would your pop song be that summed up your whole practice, like everything?
Dang, that's cold.
What'd you say?
A pop song that would summarize your practice.
Band on to Run.
I like that, yeah.
Because it's always in my head.
No, what's yours?
Me?
I'll save the most embarrassing.
Oh my gosh. I don't listen to music anymore, really.
Liar. Lies.
I don't know what happened, but
It's the sound of crickets only.
It's all
just
noise.
I just listened to crickets.
Music for airports.
Yeah.
The grinding of the stone. That's
But I did sing a song on our karaoke night, and there was one song I didn't get to sing, and there was one song that I did get to sing. I sang Just Like Heaven by The Cure, speaking of Sad Boy. And then I was trying to sing All My Exes Live in Texas, but we couldn't make it happen. And by exes, I don't know what that means exactly. You can take that in a lot of ways. That can mean a lot of things, like a bunch of unknown things, stand-ins, and etc.
Okay, we have to set the scene because we're like teenage years, okay? A dark bedroom. Christmas lights at the top, okay? An old mattress with no sheet on it. So no, listen.
Yeah.
Rios has seen the pictures, okay? Like a 1980s stereo playing Boy with a Thorn in His Side, and just me looking in the mirror. Yeah. No, this is good.
Never not performing. Not performing is not.
This was
not
all true.
performing.
This is all historical record.
I'm like, I think mine would be Toxic by Britney Spears.
Oh, I like
And
it.
on that note, thank you
Thank
all
you.
so much for coming.